there, Banditos. Welcome to the Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah. This is a big one. I've been wanting to talk to this person for a long, long time. He is a veteran penciler. You know him from so many different projects, including the Teen Titans, Wonder Woman, The Invisibles, Swamp Thing, Otherworld, which was his own creation, New X-Men, Wonder Woman Historia, which we get into. His name is Phil Jimenez. Great guy. We had a very in-depth conversation about all of his projects, about breaking into the industry, the ups and downs that he's been through. And I'm going to stop talking because this is all about Phil. This is Phil Jimenez. Phil Jimenez to the show. Phil, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. You caught me on a long work day, and my head is abuzz with storytelling problems. So I'm actually in a pretty good mood. I should
That's
say
great.
answers to storytelling problems.
Oh,
So
good.
yeah, it's been a good day.
Well, that's the fun kind of problem solving, I imagine.
Yes, 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 yes.
All right, let's hit the rewind button and go all the way back to the beginning and ask you how you first discovered comic books.
How I first discovered them. So it's a two-pronged story. I first discovered them through the TV shows that I was watching. God, in the early 1970s. I was a big fan of the Wonder Woman TV show, $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, which just sort of dates me. And I know that my mother would buy me comic books, um, with the characters from those shows. So my very first comic book was a Wonder Woman comic. I believe it was number 226, which introduced the Earth 1 and Earth 2 Wonder Woman to me. And the reason that matters is because I was introduced around age 5 or 6 to the idea of multiverses. So, so they never seemed particularly confusing to me. I became an avid comic book reader actually through Marvel Comics Star Wars because I was such a Star Wars nerd. And those comic books became hugely important to me and a group of my friends. And we would go, it's old school story and classic, to the 7-Eleven every month, I think, before we even knew about comic book stores, mostly to find Star Wars comics. And then I was finally formally introduced to comic books in high school through a friend named Eric Teasley, who saw that I could draw and asked me to copy some images from the X-Men. And I ended up drawing Colossus, and I was a long time fan of long form narrative. I was a big TV kid, so I really really loved ongoing dramas, particularly with cliffhangers. So reading the X-Men was just kind of like the heightened version of that, and I fell in love instantly. And so that's actually when I started reading superhero comics and making them myself, which is ultimately what led to my career.
Interesting, three-phase kind of approach to the comic book introduction. When you were a kid and getting those Star Wars comics at 7-Eleven, were you guys already in the mode of like keeping them and trading them, or were they really just kind of rip through them and then toss them aside?
I mean, we weren't collecting them per se, but we were definitely trading them because we would each find different issues, like different. Um, and so I know that we would exchange them. It's a long time ago now. Forgive me, I don't remember exactly the process.
Sure.
We weren't bagging and boxing them at that time. That was not really in our. I mean, we were 10, so I don't think we were thinking about collecting at that time. It was mostly we were just voracious Star Wars fans, and anything that we could get that was Star Wars related made us really happy. Uh, yeah. As an interesting aside, and there was a particular issue that I remember reading when I was 11 or 12. It was Star Wars 53. I think David Michelinie drew it, and wrote it, and Walt Simonson drew it. And Walt Simonson, famous artist of Thor, was one of my first mentors in comics. And I remember telling him the profound effect that this particular issue of Star Wars had on me and my actually worldview. And the hilarious thing was that he remembered none of the story, just how difficult it was to work for Lucasfilm. So
Interesting.
I'm pouring my heart out to him, going like, oh my God, like I think of the world in a different way now. And he just laughed because all he remembered was how hard that particular story was to work on. Because uh, the plot was a little too similar to the upcoming Return of the Jedi.
Ah, got it.
Yeah,
Got it. That could make things complicated, I'm sure,
yeah.
with a licensor. Um, wow, that's interesting. I wonder, how much that happens with prose in general, because every comic, no matter how possibly small and insignificant to you, is someone's first comic, right? And means a lot to some person or multiple people out there. And so, yeah, it's just interesting when those kind of boomerang back around and you're like, it's like, oh, I didn't give much thought to that. And yet it's, your most meaningful thing.
I think what is a trick, and I've had to learn. There was a period of time I think it was more of a sourpuss than I should have been publicly because of that exact rule. Like every comic is somebody's favorite. People would come up to me and ask me if I remembered working on a project because it was so important to them. And it was often hard for me to hide if my memories were poor about the project that I worked on. It was often hard for me to hide. And there's one or two projects particularly that were miserable work experiences, but people love them. And I just have to remember that they love them, that they paid for it, they've supported me my entire career, and not to be, what is it, the yuck to their yuck.
Yes. I've used that phrase a lot lately. That's has become a big one. And who knows, I may be asking you about one of those projects tonight. But I wanted to go back to again the beginning. So, discovering comics in high school, well, rediscovering or fully discovering them in high school. And then from what I've read, you went to SVA for cartooning, right?
I did. At the time, the School of Visual Arts in New York City was, I think, one of two or maybe three colleges in the country that had a dedicated cartooning program
Hmm.
because SVA was essentially a commercial art. It was a trade school.
Right.
Um, and so I moved from California to New York to go to college there. Interestingly, I switched majors. I became an illustration major, mostly because I needed to learn how to paint. I was not a good painter. I'm still not a great painter. But the cartooning department was so hyper focused on pencil and pen and ink, and I really wanted to learn how to illustrate. And I'm really happy I did because I had certain teachers, and the head of my department was an extraordinary mentor to me. So it actually helped me get my first job in comics, and so the switch was everything I needed. I did end up with Will Eisner as a teacher, which was so cool. Although it's funny because I was in the same class with Scott Kobush, who's but we've been working in comics the same amount of time, and we both remember. I'm talking for Scott now. If he denies this, believe him. Um, we both remember arguing a lot with Will Eisner, which is hilarious. Of course, because we were college students and we knew everything.
Right.
But I got into a very specific conversation with Will about representation because his whole belief was that a single comic image needed to be read instantly, that you couldn't have someone linger on it with questions, that the art had to be really clear and concise, particularly for gag cartoons. And so he was talking about like basically a doctor should be an old white guy with a stethoscope. And I was like, excuse me, why can't the doctor be like a young black woman? And he's like, it can be. It just has to make sure it reads, right? Like,
Right.
and this was 30 years ago, and I'm sure there, that that idea that doctors can look like anyone hadn't taken hold. I'm not really sure, but I do remember we bickered a lot about representation and comics and just a bunch of other things. And uh, yeah, good times.
That's so interesting. I mean, just even being in conversation with somebody like Will Eisner is a very special opportunity.
Incredibly special. Like I look back on it now so much more fondly than I think I did when I was 19. Right?
Yeah.
Like the
You don't
respect that's
realize it when you're that young, you know?
It is.
Just the significance doesn't really rub off on you.
What is that? What's wasted on the youth? I forget the
Youth is wasted on the young.
yes. But I really do think that's a conversation. I would love to return to conversation with him. Um, I was kind of obsessed is too strong a word, but I was really into the sort of Frank Miller Eisner, the dialogue that ended up in a book, the conversation between them. Um, and it was so funny reading it because I was like, oh my God, that is Will Eisner. That was my instructor. Not only was I sort of odd that he was my instructor, but like his point of view never really changed. And so he had Frank Miller coming in with all this bombast and Will coming in with a much sort of a more theatrical take on how to tell stories and a more intimate take. And I love that book. I reread it every couple of years. But I remember thinking like, oh shit, Will Eisner was my teacher.
So you had, from again what I've read, kind of, and we've done a lot of these interviews, a very streamlined entrance into the comic book industry, or at least it seems to me, because you went sort of right from SVA into I think your first assignment, which was at DC with, War of the Gods. Can you tell me a little bit more about like how that happened so
Sure.
quickly?
It's actually interesting. So there are layers to it. That I was essentially a closeted gay kid in Orange County, California, and I was raised in LA and then went to high school in Orange County. And I remember thinking, I can't be here. I need to be as far away from home as possible. And that story matters because it was my driver. So I was a highly driven kid. And after turning all my friends in high school into comic book characters in these homemade comics, I made about 50 by the time of my senior year. I realized that my one skill set, my one passion was making comics. I also happened to work at a comic book store, Comics Unlimited, where I met two people who had profound impact on me, Jim Lee and Adam Hughes. And both of them told me that the people that give you jobs in comics are not other comic people, they're editors. So that was the incredible advice at just the right time, because I think a lot of comic fans, aspiring comic artists, look to meet other comic artists. And these two told me like the people that pay your bills, that give you the check, are editors. So I started going through all the books that I was reading at the time, all my favorite books, and they were all edited by Karen Berger. And I found her at a comic book convention and reached out to her. I think when I was 16 or 17. And when I moved to New York City, the first thing I did, and I'm not kidding, I think on the first day that I got to New York City, I went to 666 Fifth Avenue, which is where DC Comics was located at the time. And I called from a payphone, because they existed back then, to try to get in touch with Kim Berger to see if I could get an interview with her. She remembered me. She said, call me back in 6 months or something like that. And so I did. And she says to this day, she doesn't know why, but she invited me up to the office. So I showed her my then samples. And she was, basically like, these are terrible. Take this script. It was a George Perez Wonder Woman script, and go draw it, and then come back to me again in 6 months. So I went home and actually my college dorm and wrote, counted out 6 months to the day, and then I worked on that portfolio for months. So I established a relationship with Karen Berger, and that was incredibly helpful. So I brought up the closeted gay thing again, also because in my head there was just no failing. Like I couldn't not become a comic book artist, or could not fail in New York City. Mostly, I think, because my family was expecting me to. And so over those 2 years of college, while my friends were partying, although I did go out dancing a lot, I sat at the dining room table in my dorm room and just drew comic pages. It's all I did. My roommates remember it more than I do. I was just never not drawing. So two things happened. I met Karen Berger at least one more time. She did portfolio review, was just like not quite ready. And then at the end of my sophomore year at San Diego Comic Con, I had run out of money. I didn't know how I was going to stay in New York. I brought my portfolio to San Diego, yeah, to Comic Con, and Neal Pozner, who had been hired as the new talent director, looked through my portfolio, and he gave me his business card, and he's like, I want you to do work for us." And couple months later, I did my first job for him, which was actually on Showcase 92, I think, which was the new talent showcase book.
Mhm.
Hilariously, I was in the office, this was 1991, and I was in the offices when War of the Gods was being made. And everyone knows, sort of, like any kind of historian knows, War of the Gods was a huge clusterfuck for a number of reasons. But I was such a Wonder Woman fan and a Perez fan. And I was in the offices, and Karen was pregnant, and she recognized me. She's like, "Oh, hey, do you want to do some pages for War of the Gods?" I was like, "Yes." So I literally sat in the DC offices and some for like a couple days and just cranked out. I drew 4 pages of War of the Gods over George Perez's pencils, and then Dick Giordano, who was kind of a legendary inker at the time, and I think a VP at DC Comics at the time, inked them. And then once I started working, I never stopped, except for uh, when I stopped. I never stopped getting offers. There's also one other coda to this, which my actual first job at DC was given to me by the head of my department, the man I was talking about earlier, Jack Endewelds, the head of the illustration department. His buddy was Joe Orlando, who worked in special projects at DC, and Joe needed someone to ink some figures for a toy line for some girls, for some dolls, maybe Barbie. I don't think so, based on the female characters at DC. So my job was to take tracing paper and go over who's who images and clean them up, make their breasts smaller, close their costumes if they were too open, essentially make them young girl friendly. And I did that. And I remember being scolded by Joe Orlando because he's like, "You made their eyes so pretty here. Why didn't you do it here?" And he's like, "What are you working with?" And I showed him my tools. He's like, "No, you can't work with that. You have to work with these." And he gave me a bunch of different ink pens, and that changed. That was one of those things that changed the trajectory of my career. Was that little bit of advice, like, you're using the wrong tool. And it's a big thing when I teach now. I make sure that young artists are using the tool that is right for them, because often I see pencilers who are just using the wrong pencil lead. They can't figure it out. I'm like, "Oh, you're using a 2H and you need a 4B, or vice versa, or you're inking this thing with like a 0.1 micron and you need a 0.8 whatever." So that is my story in a nutshell. And it was I mean, I've been working in comics in one way or another since I was 16 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane. The equipment thing must have been a revelation for you. And I can imagine when you talk to students and correct them, they're like, I've been trying this for months and months and months, and I can't do it. You're like, change the pencil or ink or whatever it is, and they immediately get it. And it must just be so confidence building. Like, it wasn't me, it was,
Right.
you know?
I hope so. I mean, I have been talking a lot about this lately, that I was really gifted with extraordinary mentors at an early age. And I think part of that is because I saw I was ambitious and worked hard, and needed some slapping down as well. And but this group of people took care of me, and they gave me chances, and they gave me the kinds of critique that I think young artists need. I still teach the way I was taught, because all of their all of their critique was geared towards making me better. So it all came with solutions, right? So if it wasn't just like, "Oh, this is terrible," it's like, "Oh, you're clearly using the wrong tool. If you change your tool, your work will be better." Or that drawing is a little dull right now. If you turn it upside down, it changes. It's a completely different dynamic. And There you go. Or I keep going back to Jack, the head of my department, because I was not using reference when I was painting, and he's like, "You're gonna fail if you don't start using reference." He went on to talk about how skilled I was and ambitious, but he's just like, "You're being really lazy, and you're not using the tool like you're not using the tools that all artists use." It's a very common issue with cartoonists is that we draw out of our head. And it's an issue because we're rewarded for it when we're young, particularly like when we're drawing stuff and we're like, oh, it's like magic. Like, look, you didn't even look at a picture. As if somehow that makes it better, right? And so I remember Jack telling me this, and I went home and I did this triptych, and it was all highly referenced, and it was and a watercolor, and it was actually, I mean, terrible probably, but great for me. And I remember him going, "That's exactly what I was talking about." He's just like, "This is better art than you were making." Um, and so I was again super lucky to have folks like Karen Berger and Neal and Jack, Joe, um, mentor me at like this incredible, like 18 to 22 years period. Like that's how old I was. Um, so and Walt Simonson. I got a lot of it, like gobs of wisdom and skill. And then and I'll shut up. Just thinking about like Jim and Adam. Like I was 16 or 15 when they told me these things, and they weren't that much older than me.
Yeah.
So I was just really, really lucky. So I'm a big fan and believer in mentoring and teaching and sort of passing on skill sets.
I'm interested. You had mentioned him once, and I know he was a big influence on you artistically, which was George Perez, and you were basically your first one of your first assignments was working over his layouts, I guess. Um, did you have a chance to talk shop with him and glean sort of wisdom from him at any point?
So working over his layouts, I learned a ton, far more than talking to him. So we start like he knew of me, and I was so clearly influenced by him. Like I was essentially a cheap copy of him. And I've said this many, many times, but while I think we all have influences when we read comics based on our influences, what George did in comics was unique and was not being replicated by other people. And I sort of saw it not so much as just copying him, but carrying on a tradition, kind of like the old Renaissance school style, right? Where a bunch of people worked in the same school, and I was said, um, what I wanted to do was tell stories the way George told stories because I thought um, that point of view was really important. That sense of narrative was really important. His approach to, say, like scale of figures and design, like nobody else was doing that, and I loved it. And I came in wanting to support it and be like this next wave. Um, and he was good. He actually inked, I think, my first Teen Titans book or half of it. I think I burned him out, but we didn't really talk that much until we were both nominated for Eisner's the same year. Hilariously, I was nominated for penciling. He was nominated for inking. I think in '97. And we sat at the same table, or we were assigned to the same table, and that's when we got to know each other. And that's when he first called me son, which was very sweet. And then we got to like it turned out just by coincidence over the next couple of years. So he's diabetic. He was diabetic. I'm diabetic. We were both taking ballroom dancing lessons at the same time. Our approach to things was very, very similar. So it was clear that we we very similar interests and dynamics and etc. But we were never super close. And part of that was on purpose. Like I never wanted to irritate him. We'd worked together sporadically over the years. Um, and they were never quite the dream projects I hoped they were.
Hmm.
My favorite story, going back to like your question about what I learned. So when George was getting really sick, I decided I was going to have my Tuesdays with Maury moments with him. So I started calling him more and checking in. And again, realizing we didn't really have all that much to say to each other. Uh, because we weren't super tight. But I at the time I had been inking his original JLA Avengers pencil pages from 1983, just for fun. And I love that material so much. And I actually think that the inks on it are really cool. The funny part is his art got exponentially better the following year. Like it was, and by that I simply mean anatomy, design. There was a real sense of maturity that came to it. Um, and so I was asking him about that, and he took great offense to it because he's like, "Well, I was working really fast on that book." I'm like, "No, George, those pages, those JLA Avengers pages are dreamy. The Titans work you were doing at the time is dreamy. Like I love that stuff. I wasn't admonishing it. I was just fascinated by I wanted to know what in his life suddenly catapulted him into like the next phase. And we never really got back to that because he was just so irritated by the question. And so I'm not really sure like what caused that leap. The one thing I don't know, I can't remember if he told me or someone close to him told, was that he strove for assignments that forced him to elevate, right? Like the work itself had to be better. So he had to meet it at a certain point. Um, and I kind of love that ethos. George loved comics more than anything. We shared one thing we did share was a great sort of love for our mothers and fathers that weren't so great. And I know he was absolutely driven to make his mother proud of him, as was I. So he took his work and comics and his love for comics very, very, very seriously.
Good to know. I mean, you had some great experiences with him. Even though it wasn't maybe the closest as compared to some of the others, but certainly influential.
Certainly memorable. The idea that my last conversation with him before he died was it like not a quarrel, but like he was irritated with me. I still think it's one of the funniest things in the world.
All right, let me rewind again a little bit to so you're right off the blocks, you get, your first few assignments and then it's just sort of starts going, right? You're getting the illustration assignments, artistic assignments. What I wanted to ask about was the Tempest miniseries
Uh-huh.
and where you are writer and artist. And I wanted to know about sort of that transition, if you even considered that a transition. Did you always want to write as well as draw, or is it something that kind of just grew in you as you were working?
So hilariously, I was co-writing Team Titans very early on in my career with my then college roommate Jeff Jensen. Jeff has gone on to become a screenplay writer and was one of the writers on the Watchmen TV series on HBO a couple of years back.
Right.
So we were college roommates. I was a Wonder Woman guy. He was a Watchmen guy. Like it was. We still laugh today that we ended up that these comics have loomed so large in our creative lives for decades. Um, so we were so excited because we were both being highly influenced by Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. So we had this book called The Teen Titans, and they wanted me to draw it. And I was like, well, if we're gonna draw, and then I think they offered me a chance to write it. I can't quite remember what the deal was, but in order for me to draw it, they wanted me on it. And so Jeff and I plotted like 50 issues, all sorts of really fun, quirky things. Again, because we were so influenced by the burgeoning Vertigo at the time. We kind of wanted to bring a little bit of Vertigo oddness to the book because they were such an oddball group of characters anyway.
Yeah.
But I believe at the same time X Force was was just huge over at Marvel. And the then editor in chief wanted Teen Titans to be X Force. We were never told this by our editor. I think partially because he knew we would have quit because we had no interest in that. And so we worked on 12 issues, and it was miserable because we were fighting our editor all the time because he was fighting the editor in chief all the time. So things were being changed and altered, and stories truncated, and nothing was what we wanted it to be. And then we had to wrap it up because of 0 hour. The reason the story matters is it was my first writing assignment in comics. I was just like, oh, this is what it's going to be. And I thought I would never write again because it was terrible. Um, and I was stunned by that conflict. Tempest came up, and somehow this editor championed me on it. I think because the proposal was very strong, and I think because of the sentiment, because Neal Pozner, who became my boyfriend, had passed away, and this book was a tribute to him, and I think everyone wanted that to happen. But it was a completely uh, uh, the experience was 180 from Teen Titans, and then I had an editor who supported my vision, um, and a group of editors who were super behind it. And I think only one or two lines of dialogue, the whole thing were changed. Um, and everything else was mine. And so I always say, if you love that book or you hate it, it's really one of the purest examples of me and comics because so little of it was altered by the time it reached print. I loved writing that story. I find I've written over the years, sometimes great success, sometimes great failure. I think after Tempest, I wrote the Donna Troy one shot, which I think is still really good. A lot of people think it's still really good. And then when I got a chance to write and draw Wonder Woman, I ended up quarreling with the same editor in chief that I quarreled with over on Teen Titans, um, which I never really put two and two together until just now. Our sensibilities were very different. The sorts of stories we liked were very different. I was a very needy freelancer, but also there were things I believed needed to be done for that particular project. That said, my first year in Wonder Woman was rocked because uh, Greg Rucka was waiting in the wings to write the book, and I was told constantly that I was a fill-in for him by this editor in chief, and so I would need to wrap up my stories fairly quickly, and then Our Worlds at War, the crossover came, and I had to kill off Wonder Woman's mother, who was a huge character in the arc that I had planned. So I suddenly had to rejigger 7 issues of that. And then the editor in chief that I was fighting with wasn't going to let her mother be killed in her own book. It was going to happen in Action Comics. And we fought over that and fought over that. And then the Superman people, particularly Joe Kelly, came in and said, we can do it in both books. Like, why not? Like, Apollo is a Wonder Woman character. It would be like killing Green Lantern in the in the pages of Wonder Woman or the Flash. Like it was so weird. These stories I tell you because I went from like Rocky to amazing to amazing to Rocky, and I realized I don't have the constitution to write like that. I'm not a fighter, and that I mean I would fight with my editor in chief, and there are a couple of famous stories on Wonder Woman where I went over his head to the publisher because I hated what he was doing and I believed in what I was doing so much. But that doesn't make me feel good. I don't like that. Um, and if I'm going to write something, it tends to be very personal, tends to have a very specific point of view. Like I don't want to write everything. I'm just not interested. I'm not good enough at it. But if there's something, a character that I have something to say that's so personal, then I would like to do it. But I also need the editorial support to do that. Um, I'm working on a Teen Titans annual right now, and my editor Andrea Shea is a goddess, partially because she lets me do the work, and all of her notes have nothing to do with undermining me at all. It's sort of like going back to the mentors I had at the beginning of my career. She gets it, and everything she every note she gives me makes my work better. So it was a long-winded answer to your question. I don't love. Um, I like writing. I like writing again these sort of intimate personal stories. I don't have a grand vision for like what's the next crisis. I'm not. Uh, there are other people that are better at that than I am, and I say let them do it.
So you haven't, not no pun intended, written off more writing. I mean, you're doing this annual, and where there's an opportunity for you to tell the stories you want to tell without interference and
Yeah,
crazy boundaries and crossovers interfering,
and
you're
again,
you're open to it and would do it again.
absolutely. It's been just a real roller coaster, and my big this, of course, it's my ego. But the other thing is, like, when I look back on Wonder Woman, which was a dream come true, and then it was messed with so much that first year in ways that, in hindsight, I just don't think they had to be. Like the arguments I was having with the EIC, I just don't. I think if I was a different person, I would have approached them differently. I would have negotiated differently. But a lot of the stuff, I was like, we don't have to be fighting right now. Like we are making comic. This comic in 10 years is not going to hurt your company, right? Like it was so much about all these other pressures from above, and at the end of the day, people pay for these things. I take that very seriously. That idea. So putting out comics that are weird or messy um, when they don't have to be makes me crazy because I am asking people to pay for my work. Um, uh, my work on the characters they love, and I want to do best possible job with those characters. I want that purchase and their investment to be worth it. I want to say something new about those characters. Uh, I want to put out elevated work because I think people spend a lot of money on our stuff.
Yeah,
So
it should be easier.
yes,
It should be easier, more easy experience creating things based on characters and stories you love and that the readers are buying because they love them. It shouldn't be that complicated. Um, well, actually, that's an interesting segue. I was going to ask you, you've done a number of crossover books in your time. You've done, Infinite Crisis. I think you worked on the 52 weekly series,
the JLA
JLA
Titans,
Titans, Planetary
Planetary
Authority.
Authority.
What are I mean, I can imagine they're pretty obvious, but what are the challenges with books like that with so many characters to, for lack of a better term, sort of service or give their moments to?
Um, that's actually the least difficult part of that job. So a lot of things that we just cited, I was working on in my late 20s and early 30s, which I think is the best time to do that stuff. I think George Perez was 31 when he did the first Crisis, right? Like, um, I think I keep thinking about how these classics that we go back to, particularly from the 80s and 90s, and how young the artists were who were working on that. I think we forget that because, like, when we think of Jim Lee and we think of his X-Men, we forget he was like 22 or 23 when he was doing that book and changing an industry. Or George was 31 when he was doing Crisis or whatever. Same with me. Like, I think JLA Titans I did before I was 30. Um, and so the reason I bring my that up is that was a period of time when I lived and breathed that version of DC Comics. So I knew those characters inside and out. I had points of view about them, and I was good at that kind of storytelling. I was good at those sorts of character mashups. I loved it. The ability to draw 30 or 40 characters, or the opportunity, I should say, to draw 30 or 40 characters in a space and design them and figure out the sort of emotional qualities of the work and who's interacting with whom. And the problem solving part of that is great. Like who's taller than who, who's bigger than this person, and Martian Manhunter's sitting next to Supergirl, and what would that interaction be like? I love that stuff. Um, what was hard again was interference. So JLA Titans, I remember we had to rejigger so much of the second issue, which was essentially a big fight between the JLA and the Titans, because the JLA editor at the time hated the premise of the whole book because he felt the JLA was wrong. The premise of the book was essentially that a former Titan had become kind of a terrifying threat to the world, kind of this techno organic thing. He was taking over, I think he might have taken over the moon. And the JLA wanted to destroy him, and the Titans were like, no, no, it's our friend. Give us a chance. And the JLA were like, he's tearing apart, the planet. People, like, you can't. Um, so so the author and I don't think we thought the JLA was wrong or in the wrong. From their point of view, this thing was destroying a planet, our planet, right? And their Titans were like, please, but he's our friend. So I remember gobs of dialogue having to be rewritten, motivations having to be changed to make sure that the Justice League came off okay. And like even like negotiating the fights between the characters, blah blah blah. So something that again is really fun and ridiculous and one time only gets like the people in charge, fellow creators, I've done it too, get very serious about this sort of stuff that should be really, really fun. Planetary Authority, the one thing I remember about that project is it was 44 pages and Ellis thought it was going to be 48 pages. And he was sending me a page a day, faxing me a page a day. So I never knew what was going to happen on the next page. But I was obsessed with Planetary, so I didn't care. I loved that book so much. I was having such a good time. But then we were getting to like page 42. I'm like, the story's not wrapping up yet. Warren realized he had 2 pages left or something and literally did a scene where I can't remember his name. The magician like claps his hands and all these monsters fall in the pit and the pit closes up on them and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
I was like, that is hilarious. This is like to this day I laugh about that. But it was this, that project was so much fun. Infinite Crisis was a trick because the first script was months late. And I just knew from a labor standpoint, I remember telling my associate editor at the time, I was like, I'm not going to be able to draw every issue because we're starting way, way, way too late. And the issues, there was a lot of squabbling and infighting among creators and the EIC about certain beats, and the scripts got later and later and later. And so by issue 2, we were designing them to be divvied up with different artists. And that really bummed me out because I lobbied for that job. I wanted that job so badly. I had wrapped up the Vertigo book I was working on at the time just so I could be free for that. And then it ended up just sort of being that. And the interesting thing about Infinite Crisis was the whole notion of that book was that Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman had all failed somehow. But like a big part of that was Wonder Woman had killed Maxwell Lord. And at the time, that whole idea made me insane. I hated it so much. Looking back on it now, I think I understand it more. But one of the reasons I think I disliked it was because there was no creative consistency on what that meant. So Greg Rucka thought it meant something different than Jeff Johns, than Dan DiDio, than me, right? So a major through line of the book does not have a Wonder Woman and Infinite Crisis don't match.
Right.
Um,
Doesn't have a rationale.
right. And then the other there's a bunch of other interesting behind the scenes stuff, but like that I remember just feeling so shaky on certain things because there was lack of consistency and no feeling the changes, like what we started with and how we ended were different. And there were certain plot points that changed. I think it's, the press, like certain characters died that weren't going to die and vice versa. And so what I remember mostly, like people will bring me those books and I'll flip through them like, oh my God, I don't remember drawing this. Because we were just working so fast. We were just cranking it out to make sure that it hit the shelves. and then between arguments about character motivation. And so those events should be incredibly fun. And they're incredibly fun to draw. The actual labor part of it, the drawing characters and mixing matching characters from all these different superhero teams and different times and different worlds is always incredibly fun. um, Invariably the sort of the larger creative process is can be a really messy one.
It sounds messy and complicated, and from the macro level and sort of on the micro level, fun to be actually drawing.
It's when I was looking at, I'd completely forgotten I drew this fight between Superboy Prime and Superboy from the Teen Titans. And I was like, this is good. Like, I didn't even remember the sort of breakdown of it. And it was just like, oh shit, like that's fantastic. Wow, I drew that. Like, and there's such energy, and clearly I was having a great time in so many of those pages. Um, yeah, so again, thrill. I was looking at the death of Superboy and like the sort of choreography of that and the final couple pages. I'm like, oh, I was working on all cylinders back then. That's pretty amazing.
Nice to discover that.
Yeah,
We get a lot of people that say they look back on their old work and they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I did it," and want to
I
go in
still
there and change things.
I still look back on Tempest, particularly the fourth issue. I'm like, I for how young I was, I think it's really good. like, I'm amazed. I use the Tempest miniseries as a reminder for me now to be like I was playing with panels and shapes and design in a way that sometimes I stopped doing as I got older.
Hmm.
And so I like going back to it. I was like, oh, that was actually really clever. That was really smart. Like, oh, I can do that on a two-page spread. Um, which is nice. I trust me, I don't do that with all my work, but there are a couple things that I have in the past where I look back on it and I think, oh, that wasn't as bad as I remember.
Hmm. Good.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I wanted to turn to Marvel for a few questions, because you did some work there, obviously, although I guess the majority has been at DC. X-Men particularly, which is, one of the, I guess, your sort of primordial influences, or it was big when, you were
Mm-hmm.
getting into comics. So you were there during, oh, I mean, there are a lot of pivotal moments in X-Men. They try to make every moment pivotal, but, the new X-Men with Grant Morrison, and then again later with Astonishing X-Men. Um, what were those experiences like? And did you have a favorite character in each of those runs that you looked forward to drawing?
New X-Men rocked my world in the best way because I was such a fan of that book. And then when I was invited to work on it a few times, I was like through the moon. I was obsessed with that book. I'd worked with Grant on the Invisibles. I was being teamed with him again. I loved it. We were working so fast because it was a bi-weekly book. That's the other thing I remember is
Oh yeah.
cranking out pages, getting them as fast as possible. Um, but God, did I love working on that book. I mean, it's hard for me looking back now not to say that Emma Frost was not my favorite character because that's that's in that period of time when she was evolving to what she became, now. And so much fun to draw. My first arc was, the Jean fight, and it was just like I was like, oh yeah, this is a dream come true. Like dreams do come true, and this is what that is. Um, I was also really lucky to be working with Andy Lanning, my inker, who'd worked with me in DC for a long time. And I remember going over to do new X-Men after Wonder Woman, because as I mentioned before, Wonder Woman was a rough and tumble assignment. And Marvel came in right after. Like I left Wonder Woman after being told multiple times. This happened about 5 times that I needed to wrap my stories up because Greg Rucka was getting ready to write the book. And then I would end, and they're like, "Oh, can you stay on for a couple more issues? Can you stay on for a couple more issues?" So much of my run is stop, start, stop, start because I was constantly wrapping up, only to be told that I would come, only to be asked to stay. And then after a little over 2 years of that, I was like, no, I'm done. And right after that, uh, I got the call, I believe it was Mike Marks, who was like, do you want to do New X-Men? I was like, absolutely. I was such a fan of the book. I wasn't, and, again, Grant was writing. So that was a dreamy, dreamy, dreamy assignment. And it's funny because I did that Planet X um, event, which again, just cranked that workout. That's what I really, really remember. But I love that story. A lot of people really love that story. There's a lot of iconic imagery from it. Whenever I see like, t-shirts with my drawings on, it makes me really happy. It was that that was incredible. That was an incredible time.
Yeah. I mean, it was. I think what had happened is that the X-Men sort of blew up, right, in the early 90s, and then just got, I don't know if I want to say played out, but in some ways played it, like got
Mhm.
so convoluted, I think, and so expansive that it was just difficult to either follow or to get engaged with
Mhm.
in a deeper way. And not until Grant came on, and you and Frank Quietly, and was there just a significant turn in direction and something really that I'm glad they called it New X-Men because it felt new and different.
I think what you just hit was sort of the point, partially because there was such focus on a fairly small number of characters.
Yes.
And so while there were a lot of characters in the background, I mean, the real focus was, B, Cyclops, Jean, Emma, um, who else? I can't even remember now.
Oh, now you're gonna
Uh,
make me a Cyclops Beast. Well, Wolverine was,
oh, and Wolverine, of course.
yeah,
Da, 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 of course,
in there.
Wolverine. Um, and I just really think that that hyper focus for a couple of years helped,
Yes.
because those stories became both sort of cosmic and intimate, and um, the soap opera continued, da 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 da, and I don't know, it was just great, and that the quietly stuff, just mind blowing. Also, Grant's reinvention of things is Grant's incredibly good because he loves the original material so much at rethinking, rejiggering, reinventing without destroying what came before.
Hmm.
I have peers who really take great pleasure in wiping out what came um before their runs. And Grant was just like, what can we use? How can we make this bigger? How can we re-explore this? It's a Because he loves it. And so I really appreciate so much his approach to that. Certainly back then. Because he didn't want to wipe out anything. He just wanted to explore it more deeply or in a different way.
Uh, one more question at Marvel, and then I have to get to Wonder Woman Historia.
Okay.
I'm professionally obligated, also because it's amazing. But Spider-Man, you did
Yeah.
quite a lot with Spider-Man, and I find that character, and particularly drawing him and his physicality, to be something that for some artists is easy and it just fits, and for some artists it's like a challenge because it's just different than I think most other superheroes, especially without a, those that are without a mask, those that maybe have capes, or there's just their feet's on the ground all the time, or flying, whatever. But what what is your relationship to Spider-Man in terms of drawing? Were you excited by it? Did you feel like you had a into it, or was it a challenge that you were either looking forward to or dreading?
Um, I will try to make this quick. The backstory was I was hired at Marvel to work on a Spider-Man maxi series, which essentially would have been a crisis for Spider-Man.
Okay.
So I spent months with then editor. It was called Sinister 666, and it was with editor Steve Wacker. And it was going to be this just expansive story. every Spider-Man, all of his villains, 12 issues. Um, I worked out timelines. I did a poster that was never published, like a bunch of stuff. I was so into it. And then Brand New Day came, and the entire project was wiped out, and
Ugh.
I was put on the weekly book. So a couple things happened with that. I was not prepared. I mean, I went to do this one thing, and then I was shunted over to this other, and and Brand New Day was something that the I was not an invested Spider-Man fan, but it also felt really weird to be working on such a controversial project and a weekly book. Um, and so I didn't love it, and I realized I didn't have the point of view on Spider-Man that I wish I. Like my Spider-Man was a different Spider-Man, so this one, like I was rethinking, and my editor Steve told me something, and it changed everything because I was never a big Peter Parker fan. And he goes, "Dude, you are Peter Parker." He's like, "You're totally well intended, and you're always going to show up with the cake, you know, and you're always going to drop the cake." And it was something. There was something. He didn't quite say it like that, but there was something really profound about it. Like he's just like, "You're a freelancer, and you try so hard, but you're a fuck up," basically. And suddenly, Peter Parker made sense to me, like in a way that he hadn't before. While I was drawing Spider-Man, suddenly made sense. And then when I was doing the timeline, I realized he spent most of his high school career when he was 14, 15, 16 at that time in that continuity fighting like Doctor Doom and the Scorpion and the Rhino. I'm like, you're a 15-year-old and you're fighting Doctor Doom, and then you have to go back to high school the next day and take care of your aunt. Like those things suddenly completely reshaped my take on that character. So I started having fun with him finally. Um, uh, and then I got the opportunity to reinvent the Sinister Six. And I remember presenting this at a meeting, like I think the Doc Ock, who was like essentially floating in a cloak, that was my idea. And I invented Craven's daughter, and I reinvented them all. And I think a lot of the designs were used, and a lot of those ideas were used. I invented Craven's wife, da 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 da. So to be able to contribute to the Spider-Man mythology, to the bigger mythology, felt really good because that's what I was hired to do in the first place, and that's what was fun. I didn't get hired to reinvent him from the ground up as Brand New Day was doing, or to draw like his latest girlfriend. Um, so my experience in Spider-Man, I burned out completely on Spider-Man. It was such a bummer
Mm.
because it was a big opportunity. I wasn't connecting with it, and my editor knew it. So it was just like, why don't we just quit and let you go?
Okay.
Yeah,
Bummer. I'm sorry about that.
it's all part of like I think every creator has some sort of even George Perez has the stories.
Yes, of course. All right, we won't dwell on that then. Let's move to Wonder Woman Historia. We've had a chance to talk to Jean. I have something scheduled, believe it or not, with Nicola.
Oh,
Haven't
great!
had the time to talk to Kelly Sue. But I'm excited to talk to you, being that you had the first chapter in the book, which is just an amazing book all around. But I think you probably had, and you may have relished in this, but sort of the toughest assignment because you are creating in some way this world, and all of the gods or the goddesses, really, well, gods and goddesses, the characters, the look of the environments, all of that kind of stuff. So, how is that? I guess what was your process? How did you pull that all together? And also, besides inventing it, making it look so the layouts are just amazing and just so creative and detailed. I just can't imagine like putting all of that effort into it. I'm just gushing right now. There was a question in there somewhere, but I guess tell us about the process of creating that.
The process. So a couple things. I had a period of years at Marvel and DC that were ultimately unhappy. And my last assignment at DC, um, Superwoman ended again really poorly. And it's just like, you know what? I'm done with comics. Like I've had a really great run. I'm out. A couple of months later, I get a call from Andrew Curry and then ultimately Kelly Sue DeConnick asking me to work on this book, Historia. It was really Kelly Sue's call that convinced me to do it. Though she always says I turned her down, which I don't remember, but I was like, but I ended up doing it. And so process was driven by this incredible desire to impress her. Like I just wanted her to like me and I wanted to her to like the work. Process was driven by the fact that I just shifted over to using Procreate on my iPad. So it was gonna be the first digitally enhanced book I'd ever worked on because the vision I had for it involved all sorts of textures and tones that I did not know how to do manually, but I could um, do it on Procreate. Um, and then process was driven by the scale of the pages, and also I had worked on Wonder Woman already, and I thought if I'm going to come back on Wonder Woman, I want to reinvent this mythology. Kelly Sue did too, so we were doing our version of Wonder Woman in the Amazon, which allowed an enormous amount of freedom. Because the thing about working in comics, especially with mythological characters, at least I end up thinking about them a lot, reading about them, doing research about them. So I have a point of view about them, especially in comics. And I was allowed by my editor and Kelly Sue to explore those points of view. Really, though, the process was driven by the scripts and my daily interactions with her, which were just remarkable because we were so in tune with what we wanted to accomplish on the book. Um, that said, I was stealing from everything I could. I have like 18,000 pieces of reference for that project because I was anything that I could get my hands on. Um, uh, and one of the things that really, again, affected process and my approach was that Kelly Sue told me something. She goes, even a book set in the past is about the present. And we're talking about gods here. And in universe, they're gods. They're not just super people, like they're divine beings who can create life at will. And so, with that point of view, um, we went the whole different way. We're like, we're not going to draw them togas. I'm going to bring my fashion influences to them. We're going to make them a little more timeless. That was kind of the goal, that they could exist as gods in 2021 or in 3000 BC. Like we wanted them to like span, yeah, to feel timeless and modern and fresh, as opposed
Yeah.
to just more characters and togas. So my process was gathering reference, was breaking down pages. Some came incredibly quickly, others fought me the whole way. And then it was reinventing these goddesses and really thinking about them from Kelly Sue's descriptions. Um, and like Athena specifically is so much a Kelly Sue product, but Hera is Hera and Artemis are the two that are so Kelly Sue, and Kelly Sue told me a couple things about Hera that I understood instantly. Couple of character traits. She talked about like who she was modeling the character after, and it's like I get it 100%. And so one of the things that we did, for example, just with Hera, was decide that she would never wear the same garment more than once. So every scene, every new scene she was in was a little bit like Amidala from Phantom Menace, where she was in like some new crazy outfit, which is fun for me because I got to design, I got to pull in all my fashion references. And then, we just got this incredibly elaborate book. So I think Hera has 7 designs total in that book, which I love. I think Athena has 3. Um, I think other character, Demeter might have 2. But the process was I started the original book, I started drawing in pencils and scanning the pencils in and then inking them and then scanning the. Oh, no, no, no. I would pencil, ink, scan the inks, and then clean them up in Procreate. I was like, this is going to take forever. So then I just started penciling, scaling the pencils, and then inking them in Procreate. And the further I went, the more the pencils became breakdowns, and the more the work I started doing in the inking. Um, and I took a really long time because I knew that this was going to be a moment, and I wanted to give the book the amount like the 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 sort of stuff I wanted to do was not going to come fast, and most of those spreads took me weeks. Um,
Looks, I
so
mean, it looks like it. The expanse is just epic, I think, in that book. And yeah, the spreads especially, I mean, conceiving of what it's going to look like and where characters are going to be positioned, and the flow of, the eye across them, is just magical.
that whole book is a dedication to Kelly Sue. Every line I made, every mark, every I've said this in other interviews, it's 100% true that that book exists because I love her so much.
Well, it certainly shows, and I hope she got the message.
I think she did. I think she did. One thing I do like to, the other thing is DC was, but my editors were like, the editor in chief wanted me to do one a year. And when I was in year two, I'm like, it's not going to happen that fast. And we had a quarrel. And I was like, if you want to take me off the book, I get it, but you're going to have to let me finish this my way if I'm going to stay on. But like, one of the things I'm super proud of, and I do hope we get to do a black and white edition or sort of a special edition, is the amount of design care that I took with every character, every drawing, every panel, because you just don't get to do that in our business. Like going back to New X-Men, where you're just cranking pages out and hoping they make sense. To have one chance to create a piece of art, essentially, in a business that's commercial and based on churn, is a rare gift. And DC Comics gave it to me. That needs to be said. But like I was thinking about the page which introduces the Amazon Queens, and the first Amazon Queen, who was Demeter's queen, and I chose every specific piece on her armor. Everything has symbolic meaning. Like there's nothing in that book that was accidental or without intent. And it's something I'm really, really proud of. Each of those Amazons was designed down to their toenails. Um, on purpose. Like they look that way for a reason. And it was all done in conjunction with Kelly Sue. Um, but it's one of the things I'm most proud of, to have a work that is so full of intent and to have had it become successful.
Yes,
I
I
won
mean,
my Eisners,
I know.
Mr.
Very,
Teacher.
congratulations.
Yes.
We're a little late congratulating you, but congratulations.
It's not a big deal.
Um,
I just think it's funny. Like we
it
were
was,
talking about Eisner earlier, and I'm like, oh, I
yeah,
wish you would have lived to have seen this.
yeah, for you to get the award named after him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also him being, a storyteller, right? I mean, you didn't just get sort of art tips from him. It was really, and obviously there were some things that were, needed to be challenged, but you got sort of storytelling, impetus from him, and I think
Oh,
that's, comes
so,
comes full
so good.
circle with Wonder Woman Historia. So
I agree. I agree. And it was that project was also nice because it sort of um it didn't resuscitate my career, but I was really just thinking I was never going to be in comics again. And then to come back to do that project and be so well received, and when I won the Eisners and all my friends were there and they were cheering me on, it was just I was like, oh, sorry. It was just I was just like, oh, I'm good at this. I know what I'm doing. Right? If you get out of my way, I know
yeah,
what I'm doing.
validation.
Yes, it was absolutely validating, and so
Good.
the whole experience was really terrific. I didn't know that the other artists were going to follow me when I first started designing, so I do feel a little bad for them because they had to pick up a lot of. I don't think they knew the sort of labor that they were getting into. Fortunately, a lot of the design work was done when they started, but
Right.
like I don't think they understood like the scope of it.
Yeah. Well, they each brought something interesting to them and to it. And also they are inheriting, so they're not doing necessarily the heavy lift that you did. But yeah, you are a hard act to follow.
Well, and they had to bring it home, right? Like they had Nicola's stuff is on Historia, some of my favorite of her work because she and I again going back to George Perez, like the assignment forces elevation. Like I could not believe how beautiful her pages were. Um, like she just rose, like, just rose to the challenge. Like it's just really, she brought it home. Like
Yeah.
that's the best.
And we're back. Wow. This was actually one of my favorite interviews. I really connected with Phil. I think he has an interesting backstory, his entry into the comics world, and then just working in this industry for so long, more than three, maybe even 4 decades at this point. But he's done it all, everything under the sun, and his work on Wonder Woman Historia, which he won awards for, is just breathtaking. So please go seek out his work, continue to support him. Thank you, Phil, for being on the show. Thank you for listening and for viewing and for rating and reviewing and subscribing. Let's keep this train going. Got another episode this week, so we'll see you then.